Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present my recent work. We have performed simulation of ASDEX upgrade scrape-off layer plasma turbulence with full-F continuum electromagnetic gyrokinetic model. I am Rupak Mukherjee, and this work is performed with Noah Mandel, Mana Francisquez, Tess Bernard, Amar Hakim, Greg Hammett, and the Jekyll team. What are we simulating? We are simulating the scrape-off layer of a tokamak. Our simulation region is the all bed curvature region that is around the outboard mid plane of a tokamak. The red helicotoroidal domain wrapped around the torus denotes our simulation region. For better visualization, in the following slides, we straighten our simulation domain like this along the z-axis, as can be seen in the animation. How are we simulating? We are simulating the 3x2v gyrokinetic equations on magnetic field line following coordinates. That is, the z-axis is the magnetic field line following direction in our simulation. The red thin line in the right figure denotes the magnetic field line wrapped toroidally in the SOL region or the scrape-off layer region. The thick red blob is extended along the magnetic field line. In our animation, the green filaments, this one, are extended along the z direction, which is the helical direction or the magnetic field line direction, which is essentially helicotoroidally wrapped, as we have seen in the previous slide, the previous animation. What are included in our simulation? We are simulating the evolution of the full plasma distribution function, or the F. This helps us to capture the turbulence with more accuracy. Our simulation is electromagnetic, such that it can capture the magnetic field line bending effects. Our algorithm does not suffer from any ampere cancellation. Further details about our electromagnetic gyrokinetic algorithm can be found in Noah Mandel's JPP paper in 2020. We simulate the SOL plasma with discontinuous Galerkin algorithm for better accuracy, and the helical magnetic field line following geometry helps us reducing our simulation cost by a significant amount. We use Leonard-Bernstein collision operator with intra as well as interspecies collisions between ions and electrons. Further details about the implementation of the collision operator is documented in the paper by Mana Francisquez in Nuclear Fusion in 2020. We use realistic deuterium mass ratio for our entire simulation. The boundary conditions in our simulation are perfectly conducting walls in the radial direction, that's the x-axis of our simulation. Periodic boundary condition in the binormal direction, that's the y-axis of our simulation, and conducting sheath boundary model along the magnetic field line following direction, which is the z-axis of our simulation. We have performed simulation for the ASDEX upgrade tokamaks experimental parameters close to the short number 33292 and 33341. Further details about these shots, the experimental measurements and the analysis of the experimental data will be found at Daniel Caralero's paper in Nuclear Fusion in 2017. It is to be carefully noted here that in our simulation, we only provide the initial ion density and the initial ion and electron temperature at the separatrix region. We also provide input SOL power and a model source inside the separatrix region. The radial profiles of ion and electron temperature and the density self-consistently evolve with our simulation. We compared these self-consistently evolved radial profiles of various parameters, for example, density and temperature of ions and electrons, with the experimental measurements performed for these specific Aztecs shots. The density and the temperature profiles of electron and the ions are measured at a statistically steady state. The density filaments shear off from the separatrix region, that is this red dotted line, and propagate in the far SOL or scrap-off layer region, thereby enhancing the turbulence in the open field line region. Here we provide the comparison of our Jekyll simulation data with the experimental results. The ion and the electron density and the temperature profiles appear close to the experimentally measured values. I want to stress again, we provide the input density and temperature values at the initial time of our simulation only at the separatrix region. These profiles are self-consistently evolved as our simulation is performed. We also measure the statistics of turbulence, that is the RMS fluctuation, skewness, kurtosis of the density, potential, and radial particle flux. Density blobs are the primary carrier of heat in the far SOL region. These blobs, as I mentioned in a previous slide, shear off from the separatrix region and drift in the radially outward direction with a velocity roughly equal to the E cross P velocity. However, the background plasma, turbulent plasma, as well as the parallel connection length of the blobs modify these velocities. There are different theoretical models of blobs or density filaments to predict these velocities. Experimentally, the velocity, size, autocorrelation time of these density filaments or blobs have been measured for Aztecs upgrade shots. From our first principle Jekyll simulation, we also measure these quantities and compare with the experimental measurements. For example, here we have found our simulation results closely replicating the blob's velocity in the sheath limited regime of the Aztecs measurements, Aztecs upgrade measurements. The packing fraction of the density filaments or blobs are also found to be close to the low collisionality cases of the experiment. The autocorrelation time of these density filaments or these blobs are also found to be close to the experimental measurements for the low collisionality cases. Higher collisionality cases are numerically much expensive, and we are currently working on it to capture the inertial limits in our simulation. Finally, we also measure the parallel ion heat flux normal to the lower diverters. Our numerical measurement is found to be pretty close to the experimental measurements performed earlier. In summary, Our electromagnetic full-F gyrokinetic or EMGK simulation using Jekyll computational plasma framework captures the essential features of SOL turbulence for experimental parameters close to the Aztecs upgrade shorts. The final ion temperature profiles in our simulation is found to be more than double the electron temperature. And this is a signature that has been observed in the experimental sorts as well. The density blobs that we track in our simulation are its velocities, its autocorrelation, its area or the cracking fraction scale approximately close to the Aztecs measurements for the sheath limited low collisionality cases. We are in the process of incorporating more realistic features, for example, shear in our magnetic field geometry, neutrals, and improved collision modules. And these features will be employed for the Aztecs upgrade simulation very soon for a better comparison with the experimental profiles. I acknowledge the Jekyll team and Gregor, Thomas, Vladimir, Dominic, Andreas, and Frank Yenko from IPP Garden. Thank you all for your attention.